Greetings. Welcome to our study on becoming God's people, where we're looking at the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and discussing how the examples that we find there help us to better understand what it means to be part of God's people. This week we are looking at Exodus chapter 3, where God meets Moses in the burning bush. Last week we looked at Exodus 1, and the more I think about it, the more I'm focusing on the oppression that Israel suffered and what it meant for them. How, even though we tend to think about Pharaoh being one person who oppresses Israel over the course of a decade, 2 decades, maybe 3 or 4, this could have been generations. The word Pharaoh, meaning great house, could represent multiple kings of Egypt who continue to oppress Israel. Israel is this ethnic minority, this foreign minority within Egypt, and the kings of Egypt are scared. They're frightened by Israel and their growth potential and their power. And so the pharaohs, the kings of Egypt, devise a plan to keep them in servitude. And it is a rather good plan to oppress them as forced labor gangs. They are not domestic slaves the way that Joseph was. Joseph was sold into slavery. He was a domestic slave owned by Potiphar, who worked exclusively for Potiphar's house. The Israelites were not. They would have had to earn a living. They would have had to make a living. And at the same time, they would have been forced to build and perform all kinds of public works for the Egyptian government. This was a different type of oppression, and it would have been particularly nasty for the Israelites. We're told in Genesis that the Israelites came down with flocks and herds. They were shepherds, not just farmers. The Egyptians were farmers. They raised crops. They were not necessarily shepherds. Shepherds and those who raised livestock required area to graze their livestock. They also required time away from cities. It was a semi-nomadic lifestyle. Israelites would not have been tied to a town per se. They would have had a base of operations. They would have had base camps, but they would have also taken their herds and their flocks to different areas, depending on the time of year, to find water and pasture. This is the dominant picture of Israelite society all the way down until David becomes king. They're this semi-nomadic group that had a range that they they worked in, that they lived out of. Now, making them, oppressing them by making them slaves in the sense of they were the public works gang for Egypt, building cities, means that they did not have the time or the luxury to graze their flocks appropriately. They would not have been able to leave civilization for weeks, months at a time, necessarily to go find the pasture land. In other words, what Egypt is doing is not just physically tying them in slavery. It's not just physical enslavement. It's also willfully and willingly hampering their ability to generate income. The Israelites would not be able to accumulate wealth the way they were used to. They were used to accumulating wealth by having flocks and herds. The more animals they had, the more wealth they had. The Egyptian policy is stripping them of their ability to raise flocks and herds, to gain in abundance. So we see that not only are they forced to work hard, not only are they forced to labor for nothing, they are also stripped of their time and ability to work on their own wealth. In other words, not only are they being oppressed now, they are restricted in such a way that they cannot possibly earn their way out of slavery. They could never climb the rungs of society in a way that they could escape from this destiny, except for maybe one or two who would then become Egyptian. They would work through the social ranks, and maybe not them personally, but their families would become Egyptian. So what the Egyptian government is cleverly doing is destroying any chance that the Israelites can become a great minority within their people. But that obviously doesn't work. And so the Pharaoh finds more creative ways to kill the Israelite tradition, namely sacrificing the kids in the river, the men. Of course, if there are no boys in the Israelite camps, well, then the girls will have to marry Egyptian men, and that will, through natural cultural pressures, eliminate the Israelites as a people group and thus as a threat. So this is very clever, but as any good narrative, Pharaoh's plan backfires. And any good, well, maybe not any good, but we love the narrative of the villain laying a trap for the hero only to have it spring shut on himself. And that's what's happening here. Pharaoh is laying a trap for the Israelites only to have it be the instrument of his own demise, because in his house he takes on this young boy. Now, I know what the movie The Ten Commandments portrays as, Pharaoh has one daughter who goes down to the river, and Moses is raised in the innermost sanctum of the Egyptian court. That is probably not accurate at all. Pharaoh would have had lots of children, at least probably. If it's most of the pharaohs, they had a fair number of children. They had a fair number of family. Moses is probably raised in the outskirts of the Egyptian court. That is, he would have known the court system. He would have known how it works. He would have known the systems of power and how the government operated, but he would not have been on the inner levels of it. He would have seen it from a distance. But still, that also allows him enough freedom to go out into the world and discover what's happening to the Israelites. Not that he would not have grown up. He would have certainly grown up knowing intellectually what was going on. But what we're confronted with in the Bible is not just that he intellectually knew something or didn't know something. It's that he discovered it in his core. What the picture of Moses killing the Egyptian slave driver is a picture of him waking up to the injustice and the brutality that is happening to the Israelites, and how they are suffering wrongly, and how the Egyptians are being unjust to this Israelite people group. He is waking up to it. It's not that he didn't intellectually understand it and then all of a sudden he discovers it. It's just that it now hits him. It's the exact opposite of what we see in Pharaoh in chapter 1, where Pharaoh did not know Joseph, meaning not that he didn't intellectually know, but that he was unconcerned. Moses becomes the antithesis of that and becomes concerned about the Israelite state. This obviously leads to his banishment, and he goes out into the wilderness of the Sinai and becomes somewhat powerful, at least in the sense that he is the son-in-law of a Midianite chief, or at least a priest, somebody who has some level of clout in the Midianite system. Moses marries into that family, giving him some level of clout, some level of responsibility. And we pick up the story where he's up on the mountain. We're not sure where. We're not even sure the name of the mountain. The Bible says both Horeb and Sinai. One of them may well be a proper name of the mountain, but one of them is probably a more general regional name, like the Mount Horeb within the region of Sinai, or the Mount Sinai within the region of Horeb. We're told in chapter 3 that Moses will return to this same mountain to worship God. And in chapter 20, it seems like God comes down on the same mountain that Moses met God on in chapter 3. We're given the impression that this is the mountain that's 3 days' journey from Egypt, that Egypt is, or that Moses, what Moses is supposed to do at the end of this chapter is to go back and petition Pharaoh to let him and the Israelites go out to that mountain that he discovered God on and worship and then return. That's kind of the picture. But we're not told where the mountain is or what the mountain is or anything like that. In fact, while a lot of pagan cultures would have had sacred spaces, this is a rarity in the Bible that the space seems somewhat sacred. It's not truly sacred. It's not a sacred space, except that God is there. But it seems like God wants to repeatedly be found on that mountain. In other words, it's not that this mountain is sacred, therefore God comes there or dwells there. It's more of, hey, you already know this mountain, so let's meet up here. That's kind of what we're seeing. And because God is willing to meet Moses on that mountain becomes sacred. So that's what we're dealing with the mountain of Horeb or Sinai. Moses is told that he is going to go to the people, and we are given this impression that Moses is really scared. We don't know why we don't know all of why, but Moses makes a bunch of requests of God and says, hey, I'm not very good. I don't know who I am. I don't know who you are. Who am I to go, I have no clout. Who are you that the people would recognize you? Which I do find is a strange thing, is this interchange in chapter 3 between Moses and God. And I guess I can talk about a little bit here, that Moses asked God, who are you? What's your name? What's your appellation that these people are going to know who you are? And God says, I am what I am. You shall tell them that it's kind of like he will be. Yahweh is probably how you pronounce it. Is, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has come to you. This is weird to me because I know a little bit about church people. Church people don't really like change. And I can't imagine what the resistance that Moses would have come back with. Hey guys, this God came to me and said, I'm supposed to lead you out of bondage, out of oppression. And the Israelites say, okay, what's his name? Well, it's the God who appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and said to call, to be identified as he who is. And they're going, no. That's not the God who called Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That God was El Shaddai, this new name. So I don't know how that would have played so well with Moses going back to the Israelites, but it seems to work. But it is a new kind of identity for God of the one who is, or the one who creates. Either way, it works. God is the one who it kind of symbolizes both. God is the being who is all exist, and that all existence comes through this God. It can actually mean both things at the same time, and that's really pretty cool. It's this new identity of God as the one who is present with Israel, and that plays out of the fact that God has heard their cries from the oppression. And I don't have a great word for outcry. I don't have a more passionate word to substitute for God has heard the outcry of Israel, although I don't think that outcry is nearly passionate enough. Listening to or reading what scholars have said about the Hebrew there, I feel like it's not nearly strong enough language. The language of the Israelites crying out in oppression is extremely passionate. They are beside themselves in stress and distress. that God has not heard them and has not saved them from the Israel or from the Egyptians. And God is responding to Moses, I've heard that, and that's hit home. So here I am to help the Israelites. But at the same time, I know this Pharaoh. I know his character. He is somebody who clearly doesn't mind oppressing Israel, clearly does not mind killing people. We're going to have to work hard for this, and it's going to cost something, because this man is not one who works, not one who works with others. I didn't realize it until this week looking through it, but this request that God tells Moses to make, to walk 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice, this would have been a very reasonable request. Pharaoh should have granted this request. There's precedent. We have Egyptian writings that there is precedent for the kings of Egypt granting similar requests from people who are workers, from laborers. This kind of 3 days to go worship, that would have been nothing. Give us a week off so we can go worship a god. That should have been simple. The fact that Pharaoh isn't going to grant that simple request shows just how cold this Pharaoh is. It is not God trying to trick Pharaoh so that the Israelites can run away when they're out in the wilderness. No, this is a test to show exactly how cold-hearted Pharaoh is. And the fact that he's going to fail in this test just exemplifies the kind of evil that runs rampant in Egypt. And so we're going to leave it there. Moses is wrestling with God. God, how can you make me do this? How can you send me on this mission when I'm nobody? And kind of, you get almost an impression, who are you even that you're going to take on the power of Egypt? So that should be in the back of our minds as we read all of this. Who is God? Who is Moses that we can trust them to alleviate the oppression of the Israelites? And so until we see you again, as always, I hope you learned something. I hope you grew in this. If I can answer any questions or if I can be of more help, let me know. Until I see you again, God bless.